it's good to see you all. It's been a while since the last Nuxt Nation, and you may know me from talking all the time about performance. So this time I will be actually talking about something else. I think maybe for the second time in my career, I found a topic that is a little bit different, but it correlates a little bit with the articles I was writing on Vue School. So if you read my articles in the past, you probably will find it a little bit familiar. Before that, to those who don't know me, so I was introduced. I'm Filip Rakowski. I'm a co-founder and CTO and also CDXO, Chief Developer Experience Officer at Alokai. I'm also a member of Technology Council of Alliance, which is a lovely organization that is focusing on bringing the API-first technologies to the front of the e-commerce world, and not only e-commerce actually. You can find me on Blue Sky. I'm not sure how many people are here already on Blue Sky. It's kind of like a new cool thing to be at, but frankly speaking, like it's 10 times better than X. It's much less bloated. There are very good discussions. It feels a little bit like Twitter was, I don't know, like 5-6 years ago. But I'm also on X, and I'm still watching it. I'm still responding there. A lot of my friends hasn't moved, so you can find me on both social media. And now, what today's talk is about. So today's talk is about the problem that many companies face, sometimes in the exact, sometimes in the different flavors. And I think when you'll be watching this, a lot of you can actually relate with at least part of the problem. And I hope you will be able to learn something useful, something valuable that you will be able to apply to the project that you work on. Because it's basically a problem of reusability, and we all work a lot around this problem. It's the way how we optimize our applications, it's the way how we make the setups more efficient, the updates faster, the cost lower, etc. And it is based on my own experiences, and the solution to the problem I'll be outlining is kind of proven in battle, so you can trust me that it actually works. And in short, we'll be talking about the multi-site efficiency problem. And it may sound exotic, but actually it's not that exotic. So in short, we'll be discussing how to efficiently develop multiple applications with some kind of common foundations, like a common part. In other words, we'll be talking how to turn something like this, where we have a common part repeated 3 times, basically, into this. And it is a problem that many companies, many projects face in different flavors. For example, the example that I will be describing is very much rooted in the e-commerce industry and use cases when we have just multiple e-commerce applications. And frankly, e-commerce applications are extremely similar to each other. Like I would say probably 70% of the functionalities are exactly the same. They're only differing on some slight UI changes. I mean, you're probably shopping online. Like all of the e-commerce websites, they're looking exactly the same. They're having all the baseline functionalities exactly the same. So it's a nice exercise to figure out if actually all of that can be extracted into the same core on the front end and then slightly changed. So that's something we'll be trying to do right now. Very often companies outside of e-commerce face similar issues with multiple touch points. So multiple entry points for the user, like applications for web, a kiosk, mobile applications, maybe some portals for different kinds of customers, like a B2B customer, B2C customer. I've seen a lot of things like that, really. And again, this is based on my own experiences, and the solution to the problem I will be outlining is kind of rooted in e-commerce, but I think it is applicable to a lot of different kinds of products. But before I will dig there, and before I will explain further, let me outline the context a little bit so we can better understand the problem. So I will start with explaining what we do at Alokai in the least salesy way possible. So in short, Alokai is a platform that helps building storefronts within the composable architecture. And you may be asking, what the hell is composable architecture? And I think the best way to think about this is like a well-tailored suit. So composable architecture is an architecture paradigm where instead of using a single backend platform to cover basically everything like that you need, like Shopify, you're actually composing, hence the name, your backend from multiple vendors specialized in different categories like content, order management, search, e-commerce, And frankly, they could be 20 or 30 different ones. And that allows you to tailor your stack specifically to your needs without living with the trade-offs of choosing one platform to deliver it all, which is very important for large companies, because at a certain scale, when we're dealing with a certain volume, even the tiniest improvements that can increase your conversion rate, they can result in huge gains, like really huge. Very often, these companies are willing to invest millions of dollars into like a year-long migration and complete rewrite to see a few percent of revenue uplift from coming like from a better conversion rate. So something that may sound stupid at first glance is actually very much rooted in Excels, and it's actually giving you a good return of investment. And these things are often enabled by a completely new technology. For being completely honest, in most cases, these companies could probably squeeze much more from their existing technology without switching to something completely new, but that's a different topic. And one of the examples how you could squeeze more from your existing setup is like by improving performance. It has a huge impact on your revenue when you reach a certain scale. And by the way, there is a good study from Amazon. It's from 2006 that showed that every 100 milliseconds that they added to the page load costed them 1% in revenue. And for Amazon, this is insane money. It's really insane money. Okay, but that's a different topic about web performance. By the way, if you would like to learn a little bit more stats about how performance is improving the business metrics, because maybe you want to convince your boss to do this, there is a wonderful website called WPO-stats.com, which stands for Web Performance Optimization Stats.com. Okay, but let's get back to the composable architecture. I had to put something performance related because it is actually very much related to those tiny optimizations that those brands would like to do. And this is actually an important piece because we'll be building something quite similar. I will be showing the code of something quite similar but simplified. So Alokai is a platform or a framework which delivers multiple products that work with each other. It's a whole ecosystem. So we deliver ready-to-use storefront and storefront UI component library. The storefront UI component library is actually fully open source and free on MIT license. You can check it on GitHub. If you're building something related to e-commerce, you can use it. We also deliver something called unified data layer. And I think this is an interesting concept. It basically abstracts the underlying APIs and rewrites all the responses to a common format, which we developed. And remember this part because we'll be getting back to this concept. We also have Alokai Connect, which is like a separate application where you connect all the APIs together. So it's kind of a powerful combination with unified data layer. And we'll be actually recreating something like this in Nuxt. And obviously, we also have cloud solution where you can host all of it without really worrying about the infrastructure, CI/CD, and this sort of stuff. And you will see in a moment that each of those pieces is actually critical in achieving our goal. And that's also something that makes this problem so hard to solve for many organizations, because it's not a single layer problem. It's about sharing and inheriting UI, business logic, data, and frankly much more, because it also has to be translated into infrastructure. Like picking from multiple vendors and making all of that work together is a Herculean task sometimes for large organizations. Luckily, Nuxt is actually really capable full stack framework that covers all of that, frankly, on its own, maybe without infrastructure, but you could argue with Nuxt Hub right now. And also, please note that this solution I will be outlining in this talk is kind of based on pure Nuxt, so I won't be using Alokai at all, but we'll be recreating something very similar, covering more or less same challenges. So, our story in short, like we went up market in the last 2 years. We used to be called Vue Storefront, then we switched to Alokai. This is kind of representing also the challenge of the type of the customer that we're going after. And when we went up market, like those big companies, they started coming to us with more or less the same problem. The problem was their e-commerce stack became increasingly complex to manage and evolve, also ridiculously expensive. And to better understand like how things like that happen, and I think those things happen for any kind of company, not only e-commerce, let's see an example of a brand called Capybara Fashion. with a beautiful logo that I created in ChatGPT. So Capybara Fashion was founded in UK. They are having a UK site, and they're doing very well. And they're doing so well, they are deciding to expand into US. So they're expanding into the US. They're opening an office in there, and they're having a US site. So right now they're having two websites, two web stores, and they're doing so well, so damn well, because everyone loves capybaras, that at some point they're also doing exactly the same in Japan. So right now they have free offices, free commerces. Every time they want to ship any kind of update, they're having free code bases to do this. Obviously, every market is different. It is managed by different teams. There are different product catalogs, and maybe they're even differing slightly on some features, taxes, etc. They are kind of different in different companies, in different countries, but 95% of that is pretty much the same application, right? But the story doesn't end here, and this is especially true for the large companies. Capybara Fashion is such a hit. They're doing so well. People love it so much. Like, you will see people wearing capybara stuff literally everywhere, that they are getting so rich, they are deciding to start buying their competitors. And there was one other company that was also a huge success, but not as much of a success as Capybara. It was called Butterfly Fashion. And they're doing so well that they're acquiring Butterfly Fashion. And Butterfly Fashion came through the same way. So right now they're actually having 6 applications. And the applications from Butterfly Fashion, they're running on a completely different e-commerce platform. So we could say that one is running on Shopify, and another one is running on Vendura. I'm not sure if you know Vendura. You probably should. I think they're having some talks around Vue.js community here and there. So, the customer comes to us, like this Capybara Fashion, and asks us for a plan on how we can make that simpler and how to best leverage the project we have in doing that, because this complexity is giving them a lot of headache. And they came with a list of very specific requirements. So first of all, they wanted to be able to use multiple backend integrations for the same code base. As I said, like, one is Shopify, another is Vendura. Obviously, over time, they probably want to migrate to a composable architecture, but at the time being, they're just having 2 separate monolithic applications. Obviously, they wanted to be able to include some logic specific to each store and maybe each region, as each brand could have unique capabilities and unique features. They wanted to be able to deploy it and scale separately. And that's super important. It's not a multi-tenant architecture where we are having a single code base and a single instance of the application to serve multiple types of customers. Here we are having a single code base that is actually deployed into multiple applications. They wanted to be able to style each brand and store separately. Obviously, like Butterfly and Capybara have different designs and different brand identities. And last but not least, actually, this is the key requirement, they wanted to release as much code as possible because they were expecting some acquisitions in the future. So they wanted a future-proof setup. So let's talk on the high level about the solution to understand it on the architectural standpoint, and then we'll dig into the actual code. First and foremost, the solution that I've chosen to fulfill most of the requirements listed here is inheritance based on files. And it is a great solution, really great solution, because it is universal. And if you've been reading my content quite old, I won't lie, on Vue School, you know that I'm a huge fan of high-level inheritance as a solution to problems related to theming or usability. It's not perfect and fits mostly into the cases where you need to extend only a small portion of the core application. So when there is a big common part, and frankly, it gets very, very hard to maintain when there is a lot of things you have to override. Then other solutions like maybe plugin architecture or things like that could probably work better. But for our use case, it fits perfectly, absolutely perfectly, and you will see why. So we're going to have 3 directories, one with the base application and all shared functionalities, then one for each store when we put the files we want to override and like the functionality styles that we want to override, right? For example, this is how we'll be overriding the product component for the Capybara store. All works on the inheritance file mechanism, so we just need to put a file with a similar path in the directory related to a separate store. Now, another thing is styling. That's another requirement. And here is one caveat. I know that we have a lot of fans of Tailwind. Probably most of you are using Tailwind, and the rest probably hates Tailwind because that's what Tailwind does. It divides people. But I think Tailwind is amazing. I think it's like a gift from the productivity gods. I hate CSS, especially at scale. I really hate it. But for this particular use case, it's not a good fit here. Even though there are tons of use cases where Tailwind shines, to make the best use of the solution that we want to develop, we want to make sure that we are overriding only the parts that we need. And for that, we need to separate styles from the markup. This way, we can change the look and feel of elements without actually changing the structure and changing the markup, which could be problematic. So ideally, we would like to land on something like this, where we have a separate component with the markup and the styling, and then a separate CSS file with the markup and with the JavaScript piece, and then a completely separate file for the styles that can be then overridden individually. Last but not least, abstracting the API. So I already mentioned that the customer is using different e-commerce vendors for different brands. Like one is using Shopify, another one is using Vendura after the acquisition. And that's a problem because you could imagine that they're coming with different data models, and it's kind of a deal breaker for having the same UI for all of them. Like, how we can make that happen, right? So the way how we will make that happen, and it's also a quite common thing that I'm seeing, especially in the e-commerce applications, and as you saw, something that we are also shipping, is data normalization. So you can imagine that like we have data, like a product data, for example, coming from Shopify, or a product data coming from Vendura, and then we have a function, a place that is normalizing this data to a common format that is then consumable by the frontend. The reality is it is extremely convenient to do something like this because the frontend usually needs to consume only a small portion of data. And on the domain level, like frankly, all the e-commerces have almost the same thing. Sometimes they are differing slightly, sometimes they are differing more, but a lot of stuff can actually be normalized. So we are having this kind of function that is normalizing different APIs. It is also making your frontend extremely portable, because if in the future you would like to replace any of those, like you're not touching the frontend at all, which is a pretty nice benefit because this way we are avoiding the tight coupling. Okay, so that's enough about the solution on its own. Let's see how it looks. And for that, I will have to stop sharing my screen, and I will have to present a different one. By the way, you don't know that, but I actually had like a 3 years break from coding, and that's one of the first things that I came back with. It's gonna be fun. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so let's do a quick walkthrough through this application and see what is happening in there. By the way, at the very end, like I will just post a link to the repository so you can explore it on your own, see all the concepts in here, etc. I will probably also write something on Vue School about that, where I will go a little bit deeper. But just from the high-level perspective, like we have our application, our simple Nuxt.js application. We have our entry point. In the entry point, we have a product component. Now, when we look at the components directory, it is empty. When we look at the server directory, it is pretty much empty. In the public, we have a standard out-of-the-box features like favicon. The magic happens here on the layers directory. And in Nuxt.js, we have a concept of Nuxt layers, and everything becomes Nuxt layer automatically when you put it into the layers directory. And the goal of Nuxt layers is pretty much to mimic the top level directory. So whatever you will put here is a layer, and layers are stacking on top of each other. So in the Nuxt config file, you are having an extends property where you could say that, okay, like we want this to be a layer, and if we put something on a different layer, we want this to override the files from that layer, and you can stack it infinitely. You can use GitHub repositories, you can use npm packages. So this is how we are deciding the order. So let's look at this base application. It's rather simple, actually. So first of all, like we are having a product that we component, which is basically what we see on the right side. and it is fetching the data from the API route called product. If we go to this API route, here I just have some mock data with Capybara, nothing special. I'm just returning this data. As you saw, I have a separated CSS file for this component. So again, if we look at this component, it's actually imported here. And one important caveat is that in Nuxt layers, when you're having a relative imports, they are actually related to this layer. So even if we override the product here, this won't automatically point to this CSS file. We'll have to either copy this or directly say that we are actually referencing to the base. So that's the first caveat. Second thing, we also have a file with global variables where we have only one variable. So if we only need to differ slightly, and it is quite common that those applications need to differ slightly, it's probably a good idea to just extract the things that need to differentiate into CSS variables and have a single CSS file that will be overriding and just specifying those things. So that's something we would call like a global configuration. Now, as you can see in here, the accent color is green, and we are using the accent color for our product image, for our product page as a box shadow. So here it is green. Yet we are showing the Capybara brand where it is red. So how does it work exactly? Like, first of all, you probably noticed that we're using an environmental variable called deployed store. And this is pretty much how we are specifying which store right now we are deploying and which store we want to preview. So I'm specifying this to Capybara, which is pretty much telling me that I am using this directory, right? So we are having layer base, and the layer base is overridden by layers Capybara, and also the global styles are being pulled from the layers Capybara. And if I will look here at the Capybara, I love this animal, by the way. I see that the only thing that was overridden is actually a global CSS file where we have changed this to brown. But also, if you look at the API routes, we see this normalization happening. So please note that the product.view component is not overridden here. We're using the old one because we just don't need to change anything in here. We only need to change the styling of the element, the global property, and we only need to change the data. And here we have this normalization, and maybe I will move it a little bit. So what we have here is we have a Vendure product coming, like just mocked, coming from the Vendure platform, mocked for simplicity, in a format that is not consumable by our product.view. Here we expect something that gives a product name, like price, product description, basically this type, normalized product. So what we are doing is that we are taking this Vendure product, we are creating a normalized product function that takes this as an input, returns normalized product as a return value. And this way, even if we're taking data from a different platform, it's being normalized, and still we can consume it in this component without any changes, which is pretty cool. Now, let's say we want to change that to the butterfly application. And in the butterfly application, we did exactly the same thing right now. So we have a global CSS where the accent color is blue. We have a Shopify data model, which is a little bit more complicated. We're also normalizing this. So when I go to env file and change to butterfly and do yarn dev, I should see the butterfly application. Amazing. Okay, but like we haven't, so that's pretty much how this works, but we still haven't covered one use case, which is, okay, what if we want some custom functionality? Well, this is when we're actually copying this component here. So we can do Command C. Not here. Here. We're going to product view, and let's say that what we want is a button by now, right? So okay, so we're having a button by now. We're saving it, and this is the problem that I mentioned, that the paths are not being resolved relatively to like any kind of top layer. They are being resolved relatively to the layer where it is. So it is looking for a product that CSS in the butterfly. It doesn't have it. So there are two things we can do. Like we can either do this. And that should make that work. And then I should probably reload the application. Yep. So we see the buy now button. Or if we would like to style this buy now button specifically for this layer, we can either do it here. Let's say I will do buy now background color. We'll use the accent color variable and color white. AI is giving a great ideas. Maybe a small padding. Maybe actually a little bit better padding. Maybe also adjusting border radius. Actually, AI is amazing with giving you ideas on how to do this. And here we are. Here we have a completely separate feature only visible in the butterfly application. And when we are getting back to Capybara, which I have to, I guess, restart, but let's see. Yeah. We don't have that button. Okay, so that would be pretty much it about this concept. If you would like to see the repo, let's get back to the presentation. You can find it under this link. And I know that example was quite simple, but I think it's actually great that it was simple, because the goal was to illustrate the problem and outline some possible solutions to different sub problems, especially like adding specific features, changing the styling, and also getting the data from multiple data sources. So if this is something that you will be facing in your company, maybe building applications for different touchpoints, maybe even working for e-commerce, I think that's going to be incredibly useful for you. And frankly, Nuxt.js is quite amazing because it is offering everything that we need to make that happen. We don't really need to resort to any third-party tools. The Nuxt Layers mechanism is pretty much amazing. And I'm very much encouraging everyone to just experiment with it a little bit. Thank you.
All right. We have so many questions. Let's get started. Can you share Pina stories between layers and app?
That's a good question. I haven't tried that, but my assumption is that yes, it will work exactly the same way as it used to with any other directory. And this is why layers are an inheritance in general is quite a powerful solution that is pretty much allowing you to do anything and have only one concept to learn to do all of those things. By the way, there was this article that I was linking. It was called Team Inheritance in Nuxt Applications. You can Google it, which is probably giving you some backdoor solution in case Nuxt layers won't work for this. But my assumption is that it will. I haven't tried it with Pina, but I don't see any reason for it to work in a different way than anything else.
All right. Is it possible to integrate internationalization with 18 layers and multi-app?
Yes, definitely. And if I would have more time, I would probably also show this. But again, it would work exactly the same way. You could have like one file with all the I18 files, all the translations, etc. Make multiple files for different geographies in the base application, and then maybe if you're having some additional things, you can either override it or have a special file that is actually empty, where you're only putting the overrides, so you don't need to override the big one in the layers.
And this one is somewhat simple. Can we use I18N?
Yes.
Cool. That was
Double
easy.
yes.
Are layers only for components methods that cannot be modified scope-wise?
No, it's for all the directories that Nuxt is delivering. So you've seen like server APIs, but it will also work for pages, assets, literally anything in there. You could just think about this as a mechanism of file inheritance. Like any directory you will put there will be just overwritten in the layer.
Got it. Thank you. Can we share and extend stores?
Depending on what you mean by stores, I assume that you don't mean Pinia stores, or maybe you do. But like if you mean stores like Butterfly Store or Capybara Store that we had there, yes, we can share them. Like all of this can be pretty much packaged into either GitHub repository and pulled directly from the GitHub repository or npm package. So the extents directory that I was showing, it can very much accommodate any kind of source. It's either GitHub repo, it's an npm package, it's a relative path in your project, like whatever you put it, it can be a layer. And actually, it's a great feature to ship UI components library that actually has all the components easily overrideable. So, if you're building one, you should probably look for layers.
How does auto import work? Files may not be named the same, stores with different methods, app specific.
Yeah, so if they are named the same, then just the layer that is on top is taking precedence. So let's say, as we have seen, like if we have a method or a component called product in one layer, and then in the layer that is on top of this layer, in this extend utility, the auto import will work in a way that it will import the right one. It doesn't work though with relative imports, as we have seen with the CSS.
Okay. And how can we build app layer wise? So app 1, app 2, etc.
I was showing this. So like it's pretty much you are specifying which app you want to build via the end variable and just building the project. As simple as that. So when you're having your deployment scripts and you want to deploy it, separate in a CI/CD, the only thing that you have to set is this environmental variable, because this is actually specifying the layer that you would like to consume, and the other one is ignored, and it is also tree shaken. The only thing that is not tree shaken, I mean, it is tree shaken, but the only thing that will be eagerly downloaded when we are installing dependencies are dependencies from other layers, because we have one package JSON, but they won't land in the final bundle, so it will only increase the time of fetching node modules in your CI/CD process.
Interesting. Thank you. Does that mean that all of the apps must be in the same monorepo to share layers and thus code?
No, they don't. Actually, I would encourage a lot. Like if you're like, it really depends on how you're working with that. It's probably more a question of how the teams are being structured. Like if there is one team working on all of that, it's probably most convenient to have a single repository, not even mono repository. Like it can be a single repository. It also can be a mono repository if you're having different dependencies and then ship it as npm packages in the repo. But like that would be my recommendation if you just have one team working on all of those projects. Maybe if we have separate teams that are consuming this, then it's probably a good idea to have it in a separate repo maintained by someone else, like released on a specific cadence, so you can track breaking changes, this sort of things. Kind of like a platform team managing that. But it really depends on the structure of the teams. There are no technical constraints around like how it should be structured, which is quite amazing, frankly.
Thank you. And last question, Will the full contents of the base CSS file be replaced by the contents of the Capybara CSS file, or are the rules merged with only the common rules being replaced?
I wish it worked in the way that you described, like it is being replaced fully, but we can also be very creative with the structure of the files, frankly. So like if we are seeing that we have a huge file and maybe there is some subset of things that we would like to override in the product component, maybe it is worth just extracting the subset of things into a separate CSS file and then overriding this. Like it's pretty much something that you can really adjust to your needs. Like you can create some sort of like a public API for modifications and things that maybe shouldn't be modified. Like if you're having a huge files and only a small portion of this file is being modified, and it's not only about CSS, it's also about the components themselves, it's probably worth extracting this into something smaller just for the simplicity.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Philip. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me again.